Welcome to Meeting by Accident with host attorney Tom Woodruff. In the next hour, Tom informs and assists people who may be injured by the fault of others. This program is not intended to give legal advice or create an attorney-client relationship and is for informational purposes only. So get ready for an informative hour. Here's your host, attorney Tom Woodruff.
Hello, potential victims. This is attorney Tom Woodruff. We're meeting here again today by accident at our studios located at Crash Central. This program, of course, is intended to open a dialogue about various issues resulting from accidents and injuries that you may be involved in. But part of the program, ladies and gentlemen, is to educate and inform you on potential ways to avoid being in those accidents and getting in those injuries so that you won't be talking with us as attorneys from the standpoint of someone being injured. If we can do that, that's our best reward. Today's program, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a subject. I don't know how many of you all out there, when you listen to the program, happen to be truckers. 10-4 big buddies. We've got a convoy going, but there are more and more seat belts being placed in trucks now, seat belts and shoulder harnesses. And also there's a push within certain states and, more importantly, by certain companies making the seat belts to put seat belts in school buses. And today's program is seat belt failures in those trucks and school buses. We have as our guest today a prominent attorney from Montgomery, Alabama. Am I correct on that, Mike?
That is correct.
And Michael Andrews is an attorney with the firm of Beasley Allen in Montgomery, Alabama, and has been involved in numerous large recovery lawsuits against seatbelt manufacturers. Our other guest has been on our program before on 2 programs. He's been on the program called Rollover Beethoven, and most of our guests thought that dealt with the musical Beethoven, but in fact it was dealing with rollovers in vehicles. And also an interesting program called Burning Bed of Fire. And he was also on our program When You Go to Trial, a Trial. Holy moly. John Overchuck is an attorney from Orlando, Florida, who's been in the practice of law since, I believe it is, 1968, John?
A long time, Tom.
Long time. And he's done a number of cases dealing with seatbelt failures, rollover of vehicles, and his firm in Orlando is well known also in product liability cases. So welcome to the program today, our guests, Michael Andrews and John Overchuck, both attorneys. Mike, do you want to be called Mike or Mr. Andrews?
Mike would be great.
And John, I'll call you John.
Please do.
Michael Andrews, the program today isn't dealing only with automobile seat belts and harnesses. We're talking today about seatbelt failures in trucks and school buses. Can you tell us about one of the recent cases you've been involved with dealing with seatbelts in trucks?
Sure, Tom. Our firm, located in Montgomery, receives a number of different types of cases that we review. Product liability is the section that I work in, and we had a case that came into us about 18 to 20 months ago involving a 2-vehicle accident. One vehicle was a small Nissan pickup truck, and the other being a large commercial semi-tractor-trailer truck. And in that case, the driver of the commercial truck was transporting a load of wood chips to a pulp mill early one morning when the Nissan pickup truck, for whatever reason, crossed over into his lane of travel, and they had an impact there in his lane. We investigated the case, and it was obvious from the outset that the driver of the small pickup was killed at impact because of the large momentum of the heavy truck. But our client's father, who was the driver of the commercial truck, clearly survived the crash and was steering his vehicle to a stop after the crash. When he, as we could determine based on our investigation, when he attempted to avoid the impact, he made a maneuver a little bit to the right and then back to the left. That maneuver caused his trailer to roll to the right side, which caused his cab, or the tractor that he was riding in, to roll over onto its right side. Even though he was wearing his seatbelt, he was ejected through the windshield of his truck, landed on the pavement, and slid to a stop. Now, he lived for about 30 minutes at the scene and then died en route to the hospital, even though he was given extraordinary medical care.
Well, how did the seatbelt enter into this particular crash when you're dealing with such a heavy truck?
Well, you know, for a long time, heavy trucks did not have seatbelts. And as the benefits of a properly operating restraint system became known in both passenger cars and other vehicles, the push came to install seatbelts and shoulder restraints in heavy trucks. This particular gentleman was what we call a habitual seatbelt wearer, meaning he would not move the vehicle that he was driving unless everyone in it was wearing their seatbelt. During the course of our case, we learned from numerous people, co-employees, family members, that he never drove a vehicle without a seatbelt, and we had that information at the outset. So my job was to go look at the vehicle and try to determine if the seatbelt was being worn and operated properly, how in the world is this individual ejected and killed? Because the integrity of the cab of this truck was maintained. In other words, the space where he was seated, had he remained in the truck, was in great shape. The trucking company that he worked for repaired the truck and intends to put it back on the road. So the issue became, how did this particular seatbelt fail? And was it something that our client's father did, or was there some issue with the manufacturing or the design of this particular seatbelt restraint?
And how long have there been seatbelts in these heavy tractor-trailer trucks as compared to automobiles, Mike?
Well, automobile restraints have been around for a number of years. You know, you think back to the classic 65 Mustangs. Those vehicles had what are called lap restraints, which lacked the shoulder restraint, and a lap belt only has certain risk characteristics that you just don't have in shoulder restraints. In more recent years, shoulder restraints and lap belts have been installed in heavy trucks. Some models beginning in the mid-'80s, most beginning by the early '90s, have had heavy truck restraint systems which incorporate the lap belt and shoulder harness.
Well, who was the manufacturer of this seat belt for the trucker that was killed?
Well, you know, most people aren't going to be familiar with the manufacturers, because when we get into a vehicle, whether it be your passenger car or a heavy truck, you expect that when you bought the car from XYZ manufacturer, well, everything in there must have come from them. This particular manufacturer, though, seatbelt manufacturer, specializes in restraints, and they are located in Indiana. Their name is Indiana Mills Manufacturing Incorporated, but they typically go by the shortened version IMMI. This company touts itself as a leader in safety restraints, and you know, it's possible that they may have done some good from time to time. You can't necessarily always throw out the baby with the bathwater. However, we learned in the investigation and prosecution of this case that there is a glaring design defect in the design of this particular seatbelt, which is called the H2 seatbelt. Now, you won't see that looking at the buckle from the outside. You can't look at it and say, "Oh, this is one of those bad H2 buckles." But they are out there on the road, and there is an internal design flaw which causes the buckle to fail to latch under certain circumstances.
Well, if they're still out on the road, how come the company hasn't done a recall and repaired them, or at least changed them out?
Well, what a great question. In learning about this case, we began to receive what's known as discovery. We began to receive documents which indicated to us that this particular buckle was used initially in 2002 in heavy trucks, and almost immediately when this buckle was introduced, IMMI began to receive complaints, and the complaints more or less were a drumbeat, and it was, "My belt doesn't buckle properly. My belt doesn't buckle properly. I think my belt is buckled, and later when I'm driving down the road, it comes open. What's the problem here? So they had opportunities early on, and rather than do the right thing and recall and replace all of the existing buckles, they began what is known in the industry as a silent recall. And that's just simply the old squeaky wheel gets the grease way to deal with a problem. And it's if you have a problem and you complain about it, we'll send you a new seatbelt buckle. If you don't complain, you must be okay, and you go on. What we learned, though, is that in late to mid-2003, engineers at Indiana Mills began to look at this problem in more detail because they had such a volume of complaints. And when they began to look at it, they went and pulled paperwork that dated back to the original design and inception of this particular seatbelt buckle. Those documents indicated that this potential failure, this failure to latch, was known and identified 2 years earlier. So they pulled that document and they looked at it and they said, you know what, you're right, there is a problem, and here's a real simple fix. It involves a little plastic tab, and this tab will prevent the problem. So a new fix was engineered, the new buckle design was engineered, and by late 2003, Indiana Mills had a replacement buckle for these defective buckles. The problem, obviously, is that our truck was built in early 2004 using the old buckles.
Well, let's go back. You said that they knew 2 years earlier before they started putting these buckles out on the road that they had a defect, or did it occur they learned 2 years before this incident in 2004?
Well, we know they knew 2 years before the incident, and in fact, we think they knew as early as 2001. Manufacturers will typically go through a design process and formulate a document which is known as a failure modes and effects analysis, and it's a complicated term just that says, hey, how many ways can this product fail and what happens when it does? And one of the failure modes that was identified for this buckle was a failure to latch. The reason for that was improper design, and they had this scale of severity, 1 to 10, 10 being the worst. Well, this was assigned a 10.
Well, so, Mike, I'm going to briefly interrupt both of y'all here. I'm going to let John speak after the break. But we're getting ready, ladies and gentlemen, for a commercial break here. And we're talking with attorney Michael Andrews and attorney John Overchuck. Michael Andrews being from Montgomery, Alabama, and John Overchuck from Orlando, Florida. Both are individuals dealing with seatbelt failures. Today's program is seatbelt failures in trucks and school buses. And we'll be back after the break here at Crash Central, where we are meeting by accident on the failure of seatbelts.
Bringing you around the world right from your desktop. VoiceAmerica.com.
Reconnect with FSU. In the FSU Alumni Online community, you can find your classmates, post messages, search for jobs, and even get a permanent FSU email address. Visit the FSU Alumni Association online at alumni.fsu.edu. All Florida State Seminoles are welcome to join the FSU Alumni Association. Visit the FSU Alumni Association online at alumni.fsu.edu and sign up today.
A renowned speaker, writer, and personal coach, Steve Maraboli has risen to national prominence by delivering highly penetrating and effective programs that help people shake off mediocrity, destroy personal barriers, live up to their greatest potential, and align themselves with happiness, success, and excellence. From Fortune 500 companies, national corporations, and social organizations, to professional athletes and inner-city youth, Steve Maraboli is the recognized leader in personal enhancement. Speeches, seminars, and coaching with Steve Maraboli are designed to help break through the barriers that hinder happiness and success, rejuvenate ambition, reignite the drive to succeed, boost productivity, amplify motivation and inspirational drive, renew inner strength, and maximize effectiveness. Today is a new day. Release the power within. For more information, visit our website, abettertoday.com or stevemaraboli.com. or email us at staff@stevemaraboli.com. Steve Maraboli. Ever wonder what are the favorite travel destinations of the Hollywood jet set? Where do celebrities like to go when they aren't walking the red carpet? Tune in to Traveras Celebrity Travel Talk with President of Traveras, David Manning, and Lisa O'Hurley, golf aficionado and wife of actor John O'Hurley. On Traveras Celebrity Travel Talk, David and Lisa talk with well-known actors, sports celebrities, and entertainment insiders to find out about their favorite travel destinations and what they recommend. On Traveras Celebrity Travel Talk, David and Lisa also offer up feature vacations each week and last-minute deals for your next getaway. Find out what's new and exciting in the travel industry, as well as how to raise money for your nonprofit organizations while enjoying a wonderful vacation. Traveras Celebrity Travel Talk with David Manning and Lisa O'Hurley broadcasts each Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Voice America channel. Traveras Celebrity Travel Talk, your inside look into celebrities and travel.
Conversation at a click of a mouse. VoiceAmerica.com.
Welcome back to Meeting by Accident. If you have a question or comment, dial toll-free 1-866-472-5788. Now back to the show. Here's Tom.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is attorney Tom Woodruff. We're meeting by accident today here at Crash Central. Our program is dealing with seatbelt failures in trucks and school buses and also seatbelt failures in automobiles. We have as our guest attorney John R. Overchuck from Orlando, Florida, who does a lot of cases throughout the country and here in Florida dealing with seatbelts and products liability. And Michael Andrews, an attorney from Montgomery, Alabama, who also does nationwide suits dealing with seatbelts and products liability. We had been talking a little earlier in our first program about a case that Michael Andrews has with a semi-trailer truck that overturned and the driver was thrown out of the vehicle after having been alive in the original crash, but then when he got thrown out through the front window was killed because his seatbelt hadn't buckled. Now, John, you indicated at the break that you have a case dealing with the Nissan, which just happened to be the type of vehicle that semi-trailer truck ran into. Tell us a little bit about the seatbelts and Nissans.
Exactly. You know, Tom, meeting by accident, Mike and I are meeting by accident today, but we've got a lot in common. In his case, it was a Nissan pickup truck that I think either his truck struck or struck him. In my case, it was a 1999 Nissan Frontier, which is a pickup truck. And my client was absolutely not at fault in this accident. Another vehicle ran a stop sign, hit her in the side, caused her to go into an out-of-control type situation where she rolled over, and she was ejected, much like Mike. And she was ejected and is now a quadriplegic, which, as you know, I mean, she's paralyzed from the neck down and has a life none of us would envy from here on out. And what we've learned is that not only the Nissans, but all of the major manufacturers use a belt called the Takata 52 series. And that's made, much like Mike's case, it's made by a manufacturing company that specializes in seat belts. And it gets into what's called a partial latch situation. And you think you've got your belt latched. And in my case, my client remembers buckling up before she left work that day. She happens to be a school bus driver. There was another school bus driver who saw her buckle up. And probably less than 10 minutes later, she's being ejected, even though she's buckled. And interestingly, the first paramedic on the scene goes to her side, and the first thing out of my client's mouth is, "I don't know what happened. I was seatbelted." And so, obviously, these problems exist, and the people who are unfortunate enough to be the victims of these accidents have no idea that the seatbelt is not properly latched. Making matters worse, in my opinion, in this particular case, there is a light on the dashboard that if you do not buckle your belt, the light stays on. That's a warning device. However, if you put it into a partial latch, like she did, the light goes off.
Well,
so not only does she not have any idea that her belt is not fully latched, but her warning device is telling her that it is. So, a seatbelt is only as good as it functions, and there's a lot of problems out here.
Well, John and Mike, first off, for the trucks, is it a federal requirement now that they have seatbelts and harnesses?
Yes.
And so most of the states now are requiring seatbelts and people to wear them. And so you're getting them in the cars, and you're having to put them on because the state requires it. Here in Florida now, they're beginning to give tickets just because you don't have your seatbelt on, and they can stop you just because you don't have a seatbelt on. The public puts the seatbelt on, and you're telling us that you don't have any way to know that it isn't locking until you're in a crash?
Yeah, and that's as John just mentioned, that's the real sad aspect here, is that the wearer, not only are we in states where we have compulsory seatbelt requirements, where you can be ticketed, and I would assume that if you have enough tickets, maybe there's even some criminal penalty. I don't know. But definitely a financial penalty that if you don't wear your seatbelt. Well, when you buckle your seatbelt and you trust the company that made it, and you rely on the auto company that they will produce and sell to you a safe product, I don't know what else the public can do. And there's also this talk of federal regulations which will make sure you have a safe product. Well, that's simply hogwash, because the buckle in our case, and I'm sure the buckle in John's case, passed the federal standards. I
was going to ask that question, John. In the case of your client getting thrown out of the vehicle from the seatbelt, did that seatbelt meet all the, quote, federal requirements?
Well, yes and no, Tom. There's a federal regulation, and we call it FMVSS, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 209. And the regulation sets out what this seatbelt buckle must comply with. And it says that you actually the tester is supposed to try to put it into what's called a false latch. But then it goes on to say, but it must be representative of actual use. And they do not tell you how to test it. So there's no requirement of how the manufacturer is to test these things. So in the situation with Takata, they have a testing facility called United States Testing Company. And when you take their deposition, and by the way, without litigation and without people being put under oath and sworn to tell the truth, we wouldn't know a tenth of what we know today about safety. But once these people were deposed, you found out that for a period of time, they did test for false latching, and they found buckles that would false latch. Then for some reason, and they can't give me a document, they can't give me a person that made the decision, but for some reason, suddenly they no longer test for false latching because they call it an ejector spring buckle. And for some reason, in their testimony, they don't have to test. So are they supposed to test? Yes. Are they supposed to meet certain requirements? Yes. But those requirements are vague, and they're not always done the way they should have been done.
Well, Mike and John, that just brings a question up that may be getting a little bit into politics, but hasn't some of the manufacturers, particularly car manufacturers, attempted to pass legislation in Washington that if their product meets the minimum standards that the government puts out for production of the automobiles, et cetera, that is a presumption that they built it properly and that it's not dangerous?
Absolutely. That refers to a hoped-for federal preemption. In other words, if you're injured, even though the product may be defective, guess what? There's a federal standard out there that just in passing mentioned this product or some requirement related to this product. So even though the manufacturer produced a defective device, then you may be prevented from suing them regardless of what they did, regardless of how much knowledge they had about the danger. And, something else that John mentioned a minute ago really strikes home in my heavy truck case also, and that's the warning light, and it's an issue that also speaks to standards and regulations. European standards for years have been more stringent and more geared toward consumer safety, real consumer safety, not some sort of window dressing, but real efforts that are aimed at producing safe vehicles. And the European safety standard in heavy trucks for a long time has required stringent testing of both the body of the truck and the seatbelt restraint system. This particular heavy truck manufacturer involved in my case also sells trucks in Europe. In Europe, they don't use the IMMI buckle. They use a buckle from another manufacturer, a manufacturer named Autoleave, which for years has been sort of recognized as being on the forefront of safety and testing, although they have had issues over the years. By and large, their seat belts have been the standard, the model that you should meet. And
well, is it less expensive to use this one made by Indiana Mills in manufacturing?
Absolutely, it is. And the Autoleave buckle sold in Europe has a circuit in it attached to a light on the dash. And just like John said, if your buckle is buckled, then you should get this warning light that goes off. Well, our truck, in our case, was built with the same light in the U.S., but guess what? The Indiana Mills buckle did not have the internal wiring to plug up to that light.
So you're telling me the manufacturer for the trucks being driven in the United States used a cheaper belt buckle so that they could save some money on those vehicles, but they were using a more expensive one in Europe because the testing in Europe was more difficult than it was in the United States. Is that kind of a fair statement?
That hits it right on the head. And not only that, not only did they use a same dash panel in the U.S. that has the light that's not hooked up, they also used part of the owner's manual for the European truck because they've already been printed. We'll just use those for the American trucks. Well, it speaks to this same warning light. And just like John said, you don't learn these issues until you make someone tell the truth under oath, and even then, sometimes you have to go back several times to really get to the truth.
Well, Mike and John, we've got about another minute to the next commercial break. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today with two attorneys, one Michael Andrews from Montgomery, Alabama, and John Overchuck from Orlando, Florida, both who do national work dealing with products liability and, in this case, seat belts. And we're here today meeting by accident discussing the fact that seat belt failures in trucks and school buses plus automobiles, you can be killed when you put your seat belt on, attempted to latch it, and you wouldn't know that it wasn't latched until you've been thrown out on the highway and killed because it didn't latch. We'll be back after this commercial break, ladies and gentlemen. This is Attorney Tom Woodruff, and we're meeting by accident here at Crash Central.
The powerhouse of Internet Talk Radio, VoiceAmerica.com.
A renowned speaker, writer, and personal coach, Steve Maraboli has risen to national prominence by delivering highly penetrating and effective programs that help people shake off mediocrity, destroy personal barriers, live up to their greatest potential, and align themselves with happiness, success, and excellence. From Fortune 500 companies, national corporations, and social organizations to professional athletes and inner-city youth, Steve Maraboli is the recognized leader in personal enhancement. Speeches, seminars, and coaching with Steve Maraboli are designed to help break through the barriers that hinder happiness and success, rejuvenate ambition, reignite the drive to succeed, boost productivity, amplify motivation and inspirational drive, renew inner strength, and maximize effectiveness. Today is a new day. Release the power within. For more information, visit our website, abettertoday.com or stevemaraboli.com, or email us at staff@stevemaraboli.com. Steve Maraboli.
Education. It's the solution to crime. At the Florida State University College of Criminology and Criminal Justice, we've proven it. That's why all 50 states are working with us to develop effective education programs for convicted criminals. That's why we're a national leader. The Florida State University College of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Research brought to life. Visit us online at criminology.fsu.edu.
If you are a self-published author or an independent publisher, you know how difficult it is to gain maximum exposure. For the latest ways to increase publicity for your work, tune in to On the Same Page with Maxine Thompson every Tuesday at 6 a.m. Pacific Time. On the show, Maxine will interview thriving independent authors and give you the opportunity to call in and have your questions answered. She will also teach you fresh and innovative ways to gain more visibility and enhance sales for your book. The printed word has the ability to record culture and make history. Once again, that's On the Same Page with Maxine Thompson every Tuesday at 6 a.m. Pacific Time. Make your words count on VoiceAmerica.com.
From our home to your speakers, VoiceAmerica.com.
Welcome back to Meeting by Accident. If you have a question or comment, dial toll-free 1-866-472-5788. Now back to the show. Here's Tom.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Meeting by Accident. Our program originates from Crash Central. This is attorney Tom Woodruff, and we have today as our guests Michael Andrews and John Overchuck, both attorneys who do products liability claims, and today we're dealing with claims involving seatbelt failures. In the last part of the program, we've discussed how the seatbelt manufacturer in one case was using a belt and a buckle that was not subjected to the same rigorous tests that would have been required had the same truck used the seatbelt and buckle they use in Europe, which does require more stringent tests. And they were doing it because here in the United States, the buckles they were using were less expensive, so they could make a little more profit in the selling of their trucks. And John Overchuck was talking about the Nissan vehicle whose belt buckle broke. It didn't latch, and the lady was thrown out and killed. And in both your cases, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike and John, that the manufacturers knew of these defects, in some cases, long before the accidents had occurred. Is that correct?
That's correct.
John, how about in your case? Did your manufacturer?
Absolutely, and they come, and it's really common sense. That information comes to the manufacturer in ways that you would imagine. There's something called a warranty claim, and we've all experienced this. You buy a car, something doesn't work the way it's supposed to work, so you take it in for a warranty fix. Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of complaints about seatbelt buckles not working the way they should be worked, and so, the manufacturers know about that. They know about people who write letters and make phone calls, and they certainly know about people that sue them. So the manufacturers certainly know what's going on out there.
Well, you mentioned the word I wanted to get into in the second part of this question, sue them. You indicated earlier, John, that you only found out about what was really going on in the seatbelt manufacturer's business after you were able to sit these individuals down under oath in a deposition which arose out of a lawsuit, correct?
Exactly. And Mike mentioned the word preemption, which I would probably think 99% of your listeners have no idea what that means.
Would you like to explain it to them?
Well, what it simply means is this. The manufacturers close the courthouse door to these lawsuits so that their dirty linen, their dirty underwear never gets exposed. And they do it by passing laws in Washington that simply say if we pass this standard, then you can't sue us. And that's happening today in Washington, D.C.
Well, I've also understood in a program we had concerning some prescriptions and prescription problems that the federal government, through an attorney's opinion or an attorney's letter, that's been used now to attempt to avoid lawsuits and use federal preemption in suits that might sue the manufacturers of drugs. And I hope the public understands that this program's designed to inform y'all not only on how not to get involved in an accident or an injury where you're going to need an attorney, but you should also be aware that large corporations, insurance carriers who generally pay the claims, and a number of other interested individuals are attempting to take your rights to go to the courthouse and find out why you flew out of the car, or your wife or your mother or your friend or whoever was killed by being thrown out of the vehicle because the buckle didn't latch, the truck driver's family who had their father taken away from them because the latch didn't latch and the manufacturer was simply making more money by putting in cheaper latches in the seat belts when they sold their trucks. If they meet that federal law that they're trying to pass and the legislation it passes, if there's a minimum standard produced by the federal government for the seatbelt latches and seatbelts, you would not be able to sue in court and actually determine through sworn testimony why that belt was known to be defective, why it was produced defective, why your father was killed because of that defective belt, because the federal law, federal regulations would preempt the ability to bring that lawsuit. Why is that important? Because, number one, the insurance industry, who has to pay the claims in many cases, doesn't have a claim to pay. The manufacturers don't have to go through additional processes to make the product safer for you so that you're not thrown out of that vehicle when the crash is over and you're simply rolling around in the car and you'd have been alive if you hadn't been thrown out the front window. They're not going to be responsible for their making a bigger profit. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe that this is going on, it's going on in ways in this country that you are having your rights stolen by people who have the greatest influence in Washington versus your state legislators, and it's going in state legislatures because of the same process. If they can break even a state or two out of the normal process and keep you from the courthouse to get that sworn testimony, they're all making additional profits. Now, Mike, in your case, how far has it gotten and what's going on particularly in your case at this point?
Well, we managed, we got fortunate in this case, and we had a judge that was concerned about people. You know, when you ultimately fall on one side or the other of an issue, like this, you're either concerned about the safety of people or you're concerned about making sure that the business has enough profit for its executives to have big bonuses at the end of the year. And our current administration in Washington is more concerned with their financial, political contributors than they are with the safety of you and I. In our case, though, we had a judge who is a great judge and is concerned about safety of people and individual rights. He ordered the Indiana Mills Manufacturing to produce all of their customer complaints relating to this issue. And in fact, the only way that I'm able to talk to you now about that is because the judge had the strength and the backbone to stand up and say, no, this is an issue that needs to be made public. We took our case to strike a jury the first part of this year, made it to the courthouse, and we're in the process of striking and selecting a panel of jury members who would sit and hear the evidence. And while that process was taking place, our case was resolved and was settled for a confidential amount. However, the documents were unsealed. Those documents can now be made public, and this information can be made public. But that particular case has been resolved. However, I have another case involving the same type truck and the identical restraint system that I'm about to file. And in that case, rather than a death, we have a living, breathing truck driver who was severely injured, who, just like John's client, says, look, I had my seatbelt on. I always wore my seatbelt. You get a ticket if you don't wear your seatbelt. I know that I was buckled. And
John, how about your case? Where is that status?
We are in the early stages, and actually, in my case, I know what I know, not from what I've learned in this particular case, but what I've learned from other lawyers who have handled the same cases. One of the things that I'm sure that Mike and I agree on this, the sharing of information among attorneys who handle these cases really is leveling, that levels the playing field.
Well, that's not fair, John. You guys are just chasing ambulances, and those nice manufacturers are just trying to make a profit. Why should you share experience with another lawyer?
Yeah. Actually, the truth is, Tom, so many other lawyers are smarter than me, and they don't want to do this type of work because it's very expensive. So I don't say I chase ambulances. They usually bring them to me.
So what you're saying is
there are very few lawyers in this country that are like Mike, and I would hope I would fit that category.
Well, what you're saying, though,
on the industry.
Yeah, what you're saying, John, is that by attorneys supporting each other with the evidence that they have found under oath, by taking these depositions that the federal government and the legislatures and the industry wants to keep from happening through federal preemption of the right to sue, if we don't get those sworn testimonies, those sworn depositions, it would be nigh on to impossible for an average individual and his attorney to bring this kind of case. Is that not true?
No, it would be impossible. It would absolutely not be possible to bring these cases or for justice to ever occur if the keys to the courthouse door are locked.
Well, Mike, you mentioned the fact that your records were unsealed, but you have a confidentiality in regard to the amount that was done in the resolution. What do companies try to do in regard to keeping the records from being used in other cases?
Well, they start at the outset by saying we're not going to give you the documents, or guess what, the documents don't exist. And then they say, well, they may exist, but they don't apply. Or they might apply, but you're just not entitled to them. Or, hey, you got them, but now you shouldn't be able to make them public, and you certainly shouldn't be able to use them in this trial. Once a case is resolved through a settlement, the companies will fight tooth and nail to keep everything secret. And confidentiality is just a fancy term for saying, let's keep it a secret. Let's don't let anybody know. You've heard of Pinto exploding gas tanks. You've heard of the Ford Firestone problems. You've heard probably of side saddle gas tanks and a number of anecdotal type product liability cases. The only reason the public knows about those cases, the only reason, is through lawsuits and information that was discovered and made public. And had that information not been discovered and made public, more people every day would have been injured and killed because of those products.
Well, we're coming up on our next break, ladies and gentlemen. We're dealing with seatbelt failures in trucks. When we get back at the next portion of the show, which will be a little shorter due to the type of the program, we're going to talk about the same company wanting to put their seatbelts in school buses. This is Attorney Tom Woodruff. We're meeting by accident here at Crash Central. See you after the break.
From our home to your speakers, VoiceAmerica.com.
The Woman MVP Who Set You Free, with host, entrepreneur, author, motivational speaker, corporate executive, philanthropist, wife, and mother, Luann Mitchell-Halter, is an exciting and provocative look at the real world with real exciting guests and real stories of triumph and professionalism with a dash of spice, sharing recipes for a better world on all the playing fields of life. Join Luann Mitchell-Halter as she and her guests uncover and expose us to our abilities to create our very own Big League MVP, My Victory Plan, Potential for Greatness. The Woman MVP Who Set You Free with Luann Mitchell-Halter broadcast each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern on the Voice America channel. The Woman MVP Who Set You Free. It's time to get off the bleachers, play the game of life, and be the MVP.
A renowned speaker, writer, and personal coach, Steve Maraboli has risen to national prominence by delivering highly penetrating and effective programs that help people shake off mediocrity, destroy personal barriers, live up to their greatest potential, and align themselves with happiness, success, and excellence. From Fortune 500 companies, national corporations, and social organizations, to professional athletes and inner-city youth, Steve Maraboli is the recognized leader in personal enhancement. Speeches, seminars, and coaching with Steve Maraboli are designed to help break through the barriers that hinder happiness and success, rejuvenate ambition, reignite the drive to succeed, boost productivity, amplify motivation and inspirational drive, renew inner strength, and maximize effectiveness. Today is a new day. Release the power within. For more information, visit our website, abettertoday.com or stevemaraboli.com or email us at staff@stevemaraboli.com. Steve Maraboli.
Crime. It costs the United States $600 billion a year. At the Florida State University College of Criminology and Criminal Justice, we're changing the nation's approach to crime, bridging the gap between scientific research and effective public policy. The Florida State University College of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Research brought to life. Visit us online at criminology.fsu.edu.
Conversation at a click of a mouse. VoiceAmerica.com.
Welcome back to Meeting by Accident. If you have a question or comment, dial toll-free 1-866-472-5788. Now back to the show. Here's Tom.
This is Attorney Tom Woodruff here at Crash Central, and we're meeting by accident. How many of y'all have gotten into your truck, your car, your motor vehicle, and put on your seatbelt, as the law generally requires, and driven down the road feeling safe? We're learning today from Attorney Michael Andrews and Attorney John Overchuck that just simply putting the seatbelt on, you may be in grave danger of being thrown out of the vehicle because, number one, the buckle didn't latch, and number two, because you put the two things together, your light on your dash did not come on saying you weren't belted in because it doesn't read the fact that it hadn't latched. And we've had two cases presented to us, and we've also talked a little bit about how the industry attempts to keep this information out of the public knowledge so that individuals can't sue because they don't have the documents and the information about the failures, and more importantly, how the federal government is trying to preempt the state laws and your ability to sue by what's called federal preemption. In any event, we've talked about trucks and we've talked about cars. Mike, you were telling me a little story about school bus seat belts and the same manufacturer, Indiana Mills and Manufacturing Incorporated. Tell us a little bit about the school buses and seat belts.
Well, most of us aren't commercial truck drivers. There's a very, very small percentage of our population that is employed as commercial truck drivers, and for whatever reason, manufacturers may overlook those people. There is a segment of the population that we can all relate to, and that's children and school buses. During the depositions of my heavy truck case, I am questioning one of the engineers for Indiana Mills and asking him the question, what other vehicles is this particular buckle installed in? And he begins to tell me, these various type vehicles. Oh, and by the way, they may also be in school buses. And that just is an absolutely frightening thought for a number of reasons. I'm a parent of three small children, and even if your child does not ride a school bus to and from school, they have field trips from time to time, and you don't know what vehicle they might be placed in. So I follow those questions up with, you got to be kidding me. You can't be serious that your company has installed these seat belts with a known defective history into school buses for safety of children. And his reply was, well, I'm pretty sure I think they were, and we don't know how many of those might be out in school buses today. This company, from what we can tell, and again, this is an issue that propped up relatively late in the case, and because the case is resolved, we aren't privy to go back and talk to those people again, although I'll be doing that in my next case. We know that they have made a move to install seat belts in every seat in a school bus. And, our hope is that they have learned from our case and learned from these other cases that we are aware of that this defect is horrific, that this is a safety device that has one purpose. And to sell a seat belt that can fail to latch is unconscionable.
Well, let me ask a question. I believe you told us earlier that they renamed the device so that it didn't have to be federally tested.
Well, I believe that was in John's case. Was
that in John's case?
I know, Tom, they test them, but what I'm saying is they changed the test. They were actually testing to see if they would go into a partial latch for a great period of time, and then for some reason that they can't explain, can't give me the person that made the decision, they quit testing to see if it would go into a partial latch. So it's how they're tested that makes a big difference.
And Mike, on the school bus seat belts, has this company made any effort to change the way they make the belt so that they would not have that problem, to your knowledge?
Well, this particular model was redesigned in late 2003. They began to produce the revised design in 2004. So every new buckle sold from 2004 forward should not suffer from this same problem. The old buckles, however, that were sold prior to that are still out there on the road in heavy trucks. And
have they recalled those buckles in the school buses?
We don't know. We sent a letter to the company and essentially begged them, separate and apart from litigation, please do the right thing and recall your buckles. And not only did they not send us a letter stating, guess what, we did it, they just ignored us altogether.
Well, I can imagine the difficulty that occurs with children trying to put the seat belts on in the first place because of their age, and then to expect a child to make sure the belt is buckled.
Right.
I mean, that's ludicrous. If that company has not recalled the seat belts and their the buckles in the school buses, because quite frankly, it's more dangerous for the children than it is the adults. Because children don't follow through and check them as much as adults might, even though adults generally don't anyway. Well, John and Mike, could you please tell the public how in the world they can protect themselves from this kind of situation when they get in their vehicle and put their seatbelt on?
Tom, from my standpoint, the seatbelt buckles that I've been talking about, you get in, you buckle up. Make sure you hear a loud, distinct click, and then pull very hard on your seatbelt buckle to make sure that it's not false latched. If it false latches, it can still make a click, and your light will go off on the dashboard. But we have done testing where you then pull the buckle loose, and 50 pounds of pressure or more sometimes is needed. So pull on it hard. Make sure that you have got a good latched buckle.
And Mike, how about yourself? What would you tell the public in regard to the seatbelt when they get in the vehicle?
The very same thing. Don't treat it as just a method to comply with a compulsory seatbelt law. Treat it as the device that may be the only thing that keeps you inside the vehicle in a crash. When you buckle it, make sure you get a good, firm, solid engagement and pull upward on the shoulder strap portion of the belt to make sure it remains engaged.
Well, Mike, you have been a pleasure to have on the program. Would you please tell the public how to get in touch with you if they have questions concerning seat belts or injuries and products liability?
Absolutely. We have a 42-lawyer firm in Montgomery, Alabama. We have about 300 staff that work with us on a daily basis, and we can be reached through our website at BeasleyAllen.com. You can reach us through our 800 number, 800-898-2034, and you can reach me direct through my email at mike.andrews@BeasleyAllen.com.
John, how about yourself? We have a little less than a minute to close.
Sure. Tom, of course, we're an Orlando, Florida law firm, but we practice nationwide. We're admitted pro hac vici in almost all of the states. Overchuck.com will get you to one of our websites. Productslaw.net will get you to our products website.
And how about your phone number real quick?
407-872-6222. in beautiful Winter Park, Florida.
This is Attorney Tom Woodruff here. We're meeting by accident at Crash Central. You can contact me at 1-800-670-8555 or the website attorneywoodruff.com and the email address attorneywoodruff@first1stcouncil.com. That's Attorney Woodruff, 1-800-670-8555, and we will be meeting with you by accident this next Tuesday. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for tuning in to Meeting by Accident. Please join Attorney Tom Woodruff next week for another helpful hour of Meeting by Accident.